Two of the most influential bands in music history.
There was a cold beauty about it that really touched me.
They took that kind of hypnotic disco, synthesized sound, but put crunch and hard rock guitars on top of it and some emotion, you know.
One incredible tale.
I don't know, things had changed because we've been doing it for such a long time. It wasn't an adventure anymore.
It's like a family, and you can pick your friends, but you can't pick your family.
I'm Elizabeth Olker, and this is Transmissions, the definitive story of Joy Division and New Order.
We did really well in America, and we did everything to fuck it up. We really did.
Coming up in episode 3, America, the great promised land of rock and roll. Every fledgling band's dream destination, even Mancunian punk bands.
You've kind of been brought up with the expectation that this thing exists because you've heard about Led Zeppelin touring America and all this lot, and there's hot and cold running groupies and drugs and limos, driving about in limos and stuff like that. And he said, wouldn't it be nice, wouldn't it be interesting?
By 1985, with a new American record label and a growing audience stateside, the USA was becoming less of a theoretical and more of a reality for New Order. But then that had always been part of the plan, even in the Joy Division days. Bernard Sumner.
I remember walking through Manchester with Tony Wilson. We were near St. Peter's Square. The band had a photo session, and we were walking to the photo session. And we were just talking about, he said, in a year's time, you'll be laid by a swimming pool in LA. And I was like, I just laughed at him,
Tony Wilson made plenty of outlandish predictions in his time, but on this matter, he turned out to be spot on. In the years after signing with Quincy Jones and Quest Records, New Order would increasingly turn their attention to the United States. A gamble not without its risks, though, for a band from the north of England. Andrew O'Hagan.
That tangible sense of betrayal is always there, and it was there with New Order as well, that their willingness to experiment, their willingness to take the rain mac off and sort of stick a T-shirt on and head towards the sun. What I think of is New Order's brilliant heliotropism, bending towards the sun, going to America, going to Ibiza, twiddling the new knobs, listening to the new sound, and not being afraid of the accusation of betrayal, which, by the way, was a real and present danger for them. That any band from the grim north who got too sunny, who started sort of discofying and jigging around on foreign dance floors, well, that was considered to be an absolute piece of betrayal of the worst order, that you were possibly about to join the NAF. You were about to join the camp of people whose discotheques and whose clothes and whose horrible hairdos you'd rallied against for years.
Conventional wisdom dictates that a band mustn't forget where they came from. But for New Order, there was an appeal in starting afresh. They'd been through a lot. Stephen Morris.
The thing about the lure of America, really, if I am honest, was I never heard of Joy Division. In England and Europe, at the time, there was still this thing where you get people coming to see you expecting you to play Love Will Tear Us Apart. Whereas in America, they were just, who are they? Who are these guys? They were approaching you with an open mind. And the fact that the audiences did get bigger justified our bloody-mindedness with not being Joy Division. And young people came to see us and they were quite happy and they weren't sort of wearing Macs and they never mentioned Ian. So it was good. That bit of it was really good.
One of those bright young things embracing New Order was teenager and future smashing pumpkin, Billy Corgan.
First time I heard New Order was I was dating a young woman when I was a young boy, and she said, "Have you heard this band?" I didn't realize when she first played the band that this was the band that came out of Joy Division. And I was sort of instantly attracted to what they did. I had that sort of moment of clarity, like, wow, this sounds like nobody else in the world. It's cool. I love it. And I just couldn't stop listening to them.
For Billy Corgan, there was something special about New Order that was unlike anything else he'd heard.
There's something about New Order that gives me a very specific feeling. I don't know how to describe it. It's sort of a strange kind of sad optimism mixed with a very kind of cold music. And whenever they figured that out around like something like Age of Consent, they unlocked something that was sort of magical.
Writer Audrey Golden.
I loved how both Joy Division and New Order really seemed to have something, I guess what I would call sad danceable to it. And that really seemed like my thing. If it wasn't music, I was going to be screaming along to. I wanted something that I could maybe dance alone to in my bedroom. And that was something that I felt like I could feel in my bones, that something was speaking to me. And so that was really what Joy Division was, but especially New Order.
New Order's peculiar blend of euphoria and misery somehow struck a chord in America, and their appeal there was self-evident. Peter Hook.
We were touring very happily in America, and our audiences were getting big, which was great. Coming back to England, we were a little disenchanted with it. I think that there was a detachment to touring in America. There was also an element of being weighted on hand and foot, of everything being more comfortable, shall we say, that we took to.
But for all the upsides to their growing American profile, there were also drawbacks.
The main thing was we were introduced to this scourge of the music business. We viewed it as a scourge called promo. What is it? You know, we're going at 45 grand for promo. And we didn't really understand this mechanisation of the American mid-level, semi-professional rock bands. I mean, particularly, you had to do a lot of interviews, which we didn't really want to do. It was one of our things that we don't do, was interviews.
Previously, manager Rob Gretton had deferred to the band's preferences on matters of press relations. Don't want to do the interviews? Then don't.
I think the thing is that we felt that in the same way of when we were doing Movement, and there was no point talking about your new stuff because all everybody wanted to talk about was Ian and Joy Division. So we just didn't do it, you know, and we got into a habit of doing that, which was fine.
Factory Records boss Tony Wilson.
You know, another myth, right? Don't do interviews, right? The silent group, won't talk to the press. It was, you know, the lead singer had died. The only question worth asking is, why did he kill himself, and how did you feel at the time? And they didn't want to answer that question. So they didn't do interviews. So they become the group that doesn't talk to the press. It was bullshit.
It started out as an understandable preference, but eventually the band's reluctance became something else, a strategy. One that the American label couldn't quite get to grips with.
I don't think they quite got our idiosyncratic English different way of doing things, and didn't really realise that if you do things differently, you can get noticed more than if you do things the same as everyone else.
Through their reticence, New Order had cultivated something no amount of publicity campaigns could win them. Mystique.
It was actually quite mysterious and quite compelling, your lack of playing the game, which Rob sussed somehow and played up to it, and it worked. You know, we were very mysterious.
By the time New Order had signed with Quest, that mythology had already calcified around them. So what exactly did the new American label make of it all? Gillian Gilbert.
They used to turn up in suits. That was the main thing, you see. All really smart record company guys in suits, which we weren't used to at all. It's just weird because we all used to wear like little shorts and stuff, me and Barney, and I don't know what they thought of us. But we used to have to do meet and greets, and I was like, why? Why do you want to meet us, you know? Because it was very much like Joy Division. You're on stage, that's your music. It shouldn't really matter like what you look like or what your personality was like, because Rob was always, you know, you shouldn't single out one person as the main focus. You know, even Ian You was all the same. You were all on the same level.
Rob Gretton was a tour de force of a man. His instinct for progress had kept New Order on track through unthinkable setbacks and tragedies.
Well, Rob was, I don't think he was much older than everybody else, but he was just like the father figure. He was so nice and kind, though, and very loud. And, you know, he could meet anybody, talk to anybody. And him and Tony, they did get on like a house on fire. And they were sort of the grown-ups and we were like the little kids. But I think it's good to have somebody like Rob sort of guiding you of where you wanted to go.
But it's fair to say over in America that some of his charms might have been lost in translation.
I mean, the American record company were really puzzled. I remember we went to Warner's, the office, for this launch, and I remember Mo Austin, who was the head of Warner Brothers, a very, very successful man, being introduced to him, and him asking me, he said, "Hey, Peter, where's your manager, man? I want to meet him. And I said, oh, hang on a minute. And I said, oh, he's lay at the back there on the floor smoking a joint. And Mo Austin went, "He's your manager?" Genuinely shocked, and I thought it was hilarious. I said, yeah. I said, he's pissed. He said, he's pissed? He said, what's he pissed about? I went, no, he's pissed, drinking, pissed.
That's ultimately why Tom Atencio, the exec that Quest Records had sent to sign New Order in the first place, ended up playing such a crucial role. He was a kind of translator between the two camps, the middleman.
Tom could talk the old LA bullshit, you know, whereas Rob couldn't. Tom's very good at that. And LA runs on bullshit, really.
Needless to say, it wasn't the easiest job for poor Tom.
It was a complicated relationship because clearly Rob had started with the band and seen them through all these different aspects and wanted to be very much the man in control. And I'm bringing in a different perspective, an American perspective, and a challenging perspective. So it was a contentious relationship, certainly a great deal of respect for Rob and what he'd brought, but we weren't always on the same page. And Rob was a rather more street-oriented person, perhaps. I mean, we did get physical.
Peter Hook.
Tom Atencio would say to us, "Got to do merchandising, man." We go, "No, we don't like T-shirts. Don't believe in them. Self-promotion, we don't want to do it." He going, "Man, you can make a fortune." And we go, "No." And the more he'd be into it, the more we'd decide not to do it and didn't like it. So it used to drive him fucking crazy. And every time we did a video and the band weren't in it, it used to drive him fucking mad. Especially when the bill came, you know. You'd spend £350,000 doing a video and the band weren't in it. And we thought that was funny. And he would be in tears.
Tears of fury, to be precise.
I think when they delivered one video, we were on tour somewhere, and I was very specific about what I had asked in terms of the band's presence in the video. And everyone in this hotel room, they'd just gotten a copy of the video and they were really excited and pleased with the video. And they called me in to see it. And I let the whole thing play through. And I was so frustrated because here I thought, this is the video I need. I need this wonderful showing from the band, this presentation. And it wasn't there. And I was so frustrated. I think I was sitting, you know, on the floor, and I think I leapt. I was so angry, I just sprung across the room at Rob's throat. And the band was terrific. They went, excuse us. They just left. They didn't try and separate us or anything. They'd seen us before.
Tom Atencio quickly began to understand one of the key ironies about this ever-so-serious art band. Peter Hook.
People thought we were very intelligent, very serious about what we were doing. And yet we were only like that when we were together, really, in the studio. When you were out playing, you weren't very serious, you were very playful.
In all matters, apart from making music, New Order always had the good sense to outsource their seriousness. Andrew O'Hagan.
They surrounded themselves with people much cleverer than them, and it really enhanced them in every way. Tony Wilson's jumping about madly talking about situationism. Nobody in New Order knew what situationism was. They've got Paul Morley in the other corner quoting post-structuralists, and they're like, what? We just want a pint.
Journalist Paul Morley.
None of them were very good at the kind of mythologizing that actually was an intrinsic part of the group. And there were many, many people around them that kind of did that mythologizing on their behalf.
Nevertheless, Tom Atencio quickly grew to love the real people behind all that mythology.
People have a conception of the band because they make this wonderful music and they think there's some kind of artistic, intellectual, removed artists. And that's part of it. There's that side of them, but they're also from Manchester, very earthy people.
For Billy Corgan, the same realisation came much later when he had an opportunity to meet the band he'd always loved.
I had always imagined that they were highly intellectual in their approach to music. But when I was around them and I got to ask those questions in the intimate space of a band, I realized they're the complete opposite. They're completely intuitive musicians. And I even said to Hooky, how'd you make those records? He's like, we would just get blasted, stay up for 3 days, and just work on it until we go, okay, that's good. So it totally destroyed my notion of even who New Order was as a band in personality. I had turned them into something cold and distant and, I don't know, reading Kierkegaard or something. It was the complete opposite, very Manchester, very in your face. And really, if you think about it quickly, it illustrates there's that sort of beautiful kind of street essence in their music. They really are an up off the street band, always have been.
Far from holding New Order back, that off-the-street energy only added to their narrative in the States. New York's DJ Cosmo.
I went to see them, was it 1985? At the Opera House in Boston. And there was a riot at the end because New Order didn't do encores. So people started ripping the seats out. And then Peter Hook in his book goes through this whole story. Actually, it was getting kind of dicey, people coming after the van and things. I didn't do that, but I did sit there watching quite shocked, like, what's going on?
For Bernard Sumner, it was precisely that kind of behaviour that made New Order the band they were. Sure, they were unlike their competitors, but that was no bad thing.
I think the difference was if you do it the way everyone else does it, you might have more success, but it'll be a short burn. Whereas with the way New Order did it, it made us more interesting and, it gives you more of a story. And so you've got a longer lifespan. And there's not many bands have as long a lifespan as us, so it worked. Yeah. But it wasn't intentional though. We just did what we wanted to do and didn't really listen to anyone.
Even Tom Atencio, whose job it was to get the band to play the game, at least a bit, had to admire their obstinance.
I think their choices all the way through their career are quite consistent. And if you're dealing with Tony, you're dealing with the intellectual, really. And you're dealing with Rob, who is part thug and part, old school manager kind of guy who was taking anything from anyone. And neither of them took themselves or the situation overly seriously. They were dead serious as people, but not so caught up in a desire to be successful at any cost. And that clearly comes from the band, that this is an ethic around the whole enterprise, the band members. And honestly, New Order was, I later represented Jane's Addiction. And New Order was the most punk band I'd ever encountered. They truly, truly didn't give a shit.
And just as it had in the past, New Order's punk intuition did pay off. During the mid-1980s, more and more fresh-faced fans found their way to their music.
Over America, we became the darlings of, the university radio stations. We were getting played a lot with Blue Monday and Thieves Like Us, which I thought was a much better song than Blue Monday from a song point of view. And then by the time we got to Low Life, we were really becoming very successful in America.
was through that network of local radio stations that New Order's influence began to spread into unexpected places, like Detroit, Michigan.
Well, I know I heard him on Mojo, the Electrifying Mojo here in Detroit. You know, this famous DJ who became famous from playing European music, Parliament Funkadelic, just, you know, a collage of just great music. So that's really how I found out about New Order, and particularly Blue Monday was, you know, that's my track. That's the track that drew me to them, really.
That voice belongs to Kevin Saunderson, one of the figures credited with creating techno in the mid-80s. He definitely took some inspiration from New Order, but he also remembers them taking some right back when New Order came to visit the studio he shared with fellow producers Juan Atkins and Derek May.
Me, Juan, and Derek, we kind of shared this block, and the doors were always open to whoever. And, you know, it was a lot of fascinated people. And one of them, I think they came by to visit Derek. And, you know, it was a lot of interest in how we creating this music and what tools are we using to get our sound. So I remember some of those stories about that. And it was, you know, such a great interest in Detroit.
Of course, New Order had always taken their influences from far and wide. That appetite for different sounds is one of the things that made their music so applicable, so ideal to all these different places. Tom Atencio.
And also being in that position, we're at the cutting edge of club music at that time, and being on tour with them was absolutely fabulous because every door that you could possibly want to go through was open and extended to us. It was fantastic. And New York at that time was incredibly such a creative place. And to sit down at Danceteria, which was their first agent's clubhouse, Ruth Polsky, she operated her office out of it, and sit down next to Robert Longo, and then next to a coked-up stockbroker out of Bright Lights in Big City. You know, it was just a mixture of culture that you probably couldn't experience with too many sets of other musicians. Pretty unique, I think. Incredible.
With New Order's music finding new transatlantic success, different opportunities came knocking. One of those opportunities, the chance to contribute music to a movie written by John Hughes. Tarquin Gotch was John Hughes' music supervisor on some later projects, and he remembers the late director's love of New Order.
John comes from Chicago. He was a huge fan of anything that came out of Chicago, which of course house music was just sort of beginning to. And I read somewhere, somebody said that, you know, the best ad for Chicago house music was New Order, that they did more to spread that dance music that sort of initiated out of Chicago. They did more to spread it around the world. And he was a big fan. You know, I think he came to the band as New Order, not as Joy Division. I think it was that New Order dance thing that brought John Hughes to the party.
John Hughes enlisted New Order for a script he'd written. It was to become the classic 1986 teen tearjerker, Pretty in Pink. Directed by Howard Deutsch and produced by Paramount Pictures.
You remember when you said that if I wanted your prom dress, I could have it? Mm-hmm. Well, I need it. I want it. I just need it.
Okay, it's yours.
To hear Molly Ringwald's character sobbing over a high school prom dress against the backdrop of a New Order track, you might think you'd tumbled into an alternative reality. The collision of a northern art band and America's teenage suburbia shouldn't make sense. And yet, somehow, it did. Especially for Gillian Gilbert, who has fond memories of the whole Pretty in Pink adventure.
I liked that film because I think I had more of an input musically than before. I was sort of finding my own way of writing stuff instead of the Joy Division core of 3 writers, you know, because when you've not written anything like that in a band, it's very hard to get into something that you don't know anything about. So I quite liked it because I found that more of my ideas were accepted because we worked with a producer.
That producer was John Roby, who they'd first met when recording Confusion. In the years since that experience, John's profile as a producer had grown and grown. He was, as they say, larger than life.
He was a very bombastic character, very loud, very New York in the bad way. He was also very belittling, I thought, in his attitude to you.
Arthur Baker puts it more directly.
John's an asshole, yeah. Yeah, I don't talk to John. I haven't talked to John in like 8 years. We'll be friends for a decade, and then we don't talk for a decade, and then we, John's a fucked up genius,
But the others in the band seem to like this John Roby character just fine.
Him and Barney sort of palled up immediately and became very much a bromance. Yeah, I thought he was a fucking absolute pain in the arse, to be honest. I mean, we've made up since. I think even he'll admit that he was a pain in the arse at that point. We were all, we were all off our heads. There's no responsibility. He came over to record a new track for Pretty in Pink. John Hughes was using Elegia, and he was using the instrumental of Thieves Like Us in the film, and they paid us a fortune, $50,000, to record a new track, Shell Shock. And we started recording it with John Roby. John Roby very quickly managed to spend the $50,000 in the studio.
The result of that pricey recording session was Shell Shock, a track made specifically for Pretty in Pink. And Hooky may disagree, but some would say it was money well spent. Pretty in Pink was a big hit, and it helped to cement New Order's reputation in the States. Tarquin Gotch.
It was a lovely two-way street. John gave a platform in America to a band like New Order and certainly helped them to break in America. But in return, New Order gave John some credibility. Because some of the groups that we went after for John were a bit snotty. Teen films, American, commercial. You're not Scorsese, you're John Hughes. Your subject matter isn't working class angst, it isn't upper class luxury. It's middle class, white, suburban, high school. So New Order lending their credibility to that meant a lot.
For some reason, New Order's music rang true in American suburbia. Billy Corgan.
There was something about the British UK attitude that meshed well with the coming of age of Gen X. We were the kids of the baby boomers. A lot of us were latchkey kids. So there was an alien quality to too much TV, too much time alone. And bands like New Order seem to kind of find that, yes, you're young, and yes, you want to fall in love, and yes, you're having your heart broken, but the world kind of isn't the way it appears to be. And bands like that seem to sort of signify for me, particularly, that there was this other world out there that was cooler, had more depth of feel, had a level of sophistication even about teenage angst that you certainly weren't getting from America, particularly in the rock scene in the 80s. And it was instant. When you heard New Order and you were going through that kind of John Hughes movie, I'm the kid who sits in the back of the class because nobody understands me and I got my weird trench coat kind of vibe. The minute you heard New Order, you were like, they're one of me or I'm one of them. It was instant.
In the legions of suburban Gen Xers in the making, New Order had found their crowd. Doggedly loyal and growing by the minute.
Thank you. This next song is called Pump Full of Drugs.
I personally thought it got a bit easier because we'd played with such a small audience, especially when we first went to America. We played Peppermint Lounge, which is like a club. So the actual audience were there in front of you. You were slightly raised up, but you could see most of the people in the club. And to get all that a focus of attention, they were just staring. You're just conscious of people looking at you. But as the audiences got bigger, they seemed to be more further away, so you didn't get that. You got a sort of feeling of, well, we've got to entertain you, so we've got to do an encore, and we've got to do this, and we've got to do that.
So, New Order have broken the States. They're famous, or at least the New Order version of famous. Hollywood movie scores, bigger crowds with every tour, and it must be difficult not to feel the pressure that comes with that, especially if you're front and centre.
I noticed that every time we went back to America, the audience would double and then triple and then quadruple, and, you know, it just got bigger and bigger. And then suddenly you were playing in really big venues like 15,000, 20,000, 25,000, you know, in certain cities. And at that point, I got the heebie-jeebies a bit because I thought, hang on a minute. When I started out as a musician, I just wanted to be a guitarist in a cult band, Joy Division. And I never expected this sort of commercial success. I never expected to become the frontman, the singer. I never expected to be singing in front of 25,000 people a night. And it freaked me out a bit, you know. Definitely started getting anxiety about it and started drinking more and more to calm it all down. And that was really detrimental to my health. And no one seemed to give a shit either, you know. We'd get to the airport and the next day I'd be lay on the floor, my head on my back, or in the toilet throwing up, you know. And I was basically ignored, you know. And when I look back now, I think that wasn't right, you know. It was my own fault, you know. It was me that did it, but someone should have took me to one side and tried to. But there was no solution to the problem, you see. The only solution was either stop doing what you're doing or have a drink and carry on doing what you're doing. And I had a drink, carried on doing what I was doing, and then eventually got used to it.
The thing was, excess and America just went hand in hand.
He swept along with it. You know, it's been the death of many a poor band that's found its way to touring America extensively. You kind of like surfing a wave of bacchanalianism, sort of overdoing it. Yeah, well, that's what you do, isn't it? It's what you do in America. It's not what you do in bloody Birmingham or Wolverhampton.
Now, New Order had always been hedonistically inclined, but in the early days, it never really caused any problems.
We're imbibing various substances, but it had not got to the point where it was affecting us too badly, and it was kind of productive, I've got to say, you know. It made it work intensely and helped me concentrate, you know. I found that if I had stimulants, it would help me concentrate much more than if I didn't, and also work longer hours. So it worked at that point, but, you know, you reach a point where the substances start having a detrimental effect, and then you've got to stop, really.
Now, all of a sudden, that detrimental effect seems to be catching up with them, left, right and centre. Take Rob Gretton, for instance.
There are many pitfalls to the rock and roll touring lifestyle. And if you have a capacity for or an interest in it overindulging, then it's not really the thing for you unless you've also got an awful lot of willpower, which I think Rob, God bless him, if he was here now, would admit he didn't have very much willpower. So it can be, as many people will testify, a self-destructive process.
The thing is, it wasn't immediately clear to those around him that Rob needed some help.
I suppose if you don't do drugs, especially to that extent, then you're not going to notice if someone's floundering in the deep end, you know, because we just thought he was a bit weird. And he was always a bit weird. He was a very, very bombastic, a very, very unusual character. His ideas were crazy ever since we met him, you know. So I suppose really the fact that he got crazier because he did it at such a slow rate, we didn't particularly notice. We just thought he was being Rob.
And as always, there was a drive to keep pushing forward. The band were finally on a hot streak. There was no time to slow down and check in with each other. Stephen Morris.
Well, no one wants it to stop. It's like, we're having a great time, Yeah. Rob's not very well. You're not very well. It is getting a little bit crazy, but we're having such a great time. It's like, and you don't want to be the party pooper. You don't want to say, those 16 8 balls that you went through last night was really one too many.
Ultimately, the matter would be taken out of their hands. By the end of 1985, Rob Gretton needed to step away from the band to get some help. And so for the first time since they began, the group found themselves without their all-important fifth member.
We had to start again. The Irish tour, I believe, was the one where we had this surreal moment when the promoter said to us, "Where's Rob?" And we were like, "Oh, he's not well." "What do you mean he's not well?" And all this lot. And it was like a bargaining, trying to figure out how much are we getting for these gigs? And this guy goes, "Well, I told Rob. Don't you know?" And it was like this weird sort of, oh God, it was really difficult.
Rob had guided New Order through every obstacle that fate had put in their way, and his sudden absence left a vacuum at the heart of the group.
We were leaderless. We were a bit lost. We didn't know what the hell was going on. We were in the middle of all these quite big happenings. And we didn't have Rob to look after us. So, we ended up fighting it out with everybody.
After the death of Ian Curtis, rightly or wrongly, Bernard, Stephen and Hooky didn't stop. That had been Rob's decision as much as anyone's. So the technique had worked before, and maybe it would again.
I mean, if there's one thing I've learned about this game, mate, is that nobody waits for you. There's no respect shown. You stop and you're out.
To keep up momentum in Rob's absence, it was suggested Tom Atencio might step into the fray.
Rob went down ill and went into hospital, and Tony came to me and said, "You're going to have to manage the band." And I said, "Well, I've never been a manager. I've been a label executive." And the band said, "Well, that's okay. We've never really tried to take management seriously, but we will." and they did. And it was a brilliant collaboration.
And so Tom became the American manager.
He didn't take over though, Tom. He didn't want to. We were playing all around the world and we were working all around the world. And he really was only interested in America. So I think that he didn't really push for it. He didn't really try and squeeze Rob out in any way. He was happy to just have America.
And the door was left wide open for Rob to return when he was feeling ready. But in the meantime, there's another album to record.
Up into Brotherhood, things have gone quite well.
And for the very first time, cracks begin to show.
We got fed up of each other on Brotherhood, and the split started to appear between the rock dinosaur side, as they viewed it, and their electronic, forward-looking, futuristic thing.
Next time on Transmissions, it's all about brotherhood. Transmissions, the definitive story of Joy Division and New Order, is a Cup and Nuzzle production. It's presented by me, Elizabeth Holker. Our series producer is Frank Palmer. If you've enjoyed this episode, please give us a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcasts.